We are very eager and excited to be with you all. Again, I apologize for the delay, the technical difficulties. I'm going to share my screen a little bit and talk a little bit about what this is. All right, so again, greetings everyone. Thank you, and forgive us for the delay. We are now a good 25 minutes behind the time, so if you're available to stay over, that'd be great. But we are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, thank you. We are Southside Community Center here in Ithaca, New York, and my name is Dr. Nia Nunn. I serve as the board president here. We are a historical historically Black community center that was founded in 1934 by a group of Black women who called themselves the Frances Harper Women's Club. And so yes, in less than 15 years, we will be celebrating our 100th anniversary, that fantastic centennial. And so we are here today, this Black Town Hall series. This is the beginning of a series that we're excited about. And we're really looking forward to giving the New York State Assembly candidates an opportunity to introduce themselves to the community, to share who you are. Some of you I know, some of you we're really getting to know. But let me tell you a little bit more about why we put this together. So this virtual Black Town Hall, it aims to give the Black community in Ithaca and the rest of the community, there are Ithacans here watching, there are folks across the state and maybe even perhaps some folks outside of the state. So welcome, welcome. But our gathering this evening is an opportunity to hear candidates talk about their aspirations with this position and the relevance to addressing issues, concerns and conditions experienced by Black people locally, regionally, and nationally as well. At Southside Community Center, we create opportunities to unapologetically name, address, and interrupt negative social conditions experienced by Black people. Reflecting on the relationship between our history and our present, our work at the Community Center, it aims to uplift, transform, and liberate. We're eager to continue encouraging more and more Black people to vote and to engage in this political process on multiple levels. But more importantly, we want everyone to make informed decisions. So again, we thank you all for joining us this evening. I want to introduce our moderators before beginning with an icebreaker activity, as I gave you all a little bit of heads up. After me, it'll be Siobhan Bunch. Siobhan Bunch is a board member. She is a leader in our community, a mother of 2 beautiful children. She and her husband live in the Southside community. And Siobhan was born and raised in Ithaca, New York. You may also know her as the daughter of formerly Marcia Fort, now Marcia Baum, the former executive director of the Greater Ithaca Activities Center, GIAC. Siobhan and I grew up together in the Southside Community Center. We were little girls in the Girl Scout troop. I almost grabbed a picture of Siobhan. But you know, our mothers were close friends and leaders, and are leaders in the community. And so here we are together as mothers raising our children in the Southside Community Center as well. And I must say that Siobhan is far more of a behind the scenes type of person, but she said yes, she's here, and I'm so grateful. The other moderator that I'm excited to introduce you all to is Mr. Michael Moss. Michael's doctoral research is focused on the development of gold standard, mixed method, drama therapeutic techniques, and researching the best practices for healing and care with colonized other communities, communities that are adversely affected by European colonization. He has currently developed a new drama therapy approach utilizing Stanford Meisner's repetition exercise, focusing specifically on youth from colonized other communities. I love that. And the development of an internally and externally validated and reliable tool to enable better engagement in drama therapy normed on youth from colonized other communities, assessing engagement with performance in everyday life as a precursor to engagement with drama therapeutic interventions. Michael is also a recent graduate with a Master's of Arts in Education in clinical psychology, minors in global mental health and trauma, community psychology, and research methods from Teachers College, Columbia University, and a former alternative training student in drama therapy and counseling psychology through the North American Drama Therapy Association. Currently, Michael is an instructor at the Community School of Music and Arts in Ithaca, New York, and a co-instructor of the Actors Workshop of Ithaca. He also serves as the board and leadership, on the board and leadership teams of the Tompkins County Worker Center and the Southside Community Center, volunteering at the Multicultural Resource Center as well. Michael is very passionate about creating space for arts, therapies, research in the broader psychological community. So welcoming Michael. And then our last moderator, Richard, who's also a board member of Southside Community Center. He's the vice president and an assistant director of admissions at Cornell University. He has worked in higher education in the areas of community outreach, human resources, and administration for both Cornell and Ithaca College since 2010. Richard was born and raised in the Bronx by a single mom from Nigeria. He has spent most of his career as a champion of underserved and underprivileged young people. He received his bachelor's degree from Ithaca College in politics. He is proud to serve on the board of directors of Southside Community Center. So those are the three other moderators for this evening. And again, my name is Dr. Nia Nunn. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Education at Ithaca College, and I serve as the board chair. All right, so introductions. We are the folks who will be guiding the discussion this evening. And I would love to invite all of the candidates to engage in an icebreaker exercise, if you will. And the purpose of these exercises is just giving you an opportunity, again, to just share who you are. And so I am, if you wouldn't mind taking out your paper, if you got your paper out and a marker, all right, hold it up, let's see, everybody's got their goods. And so what I'm gonna do for this first exercise is I'm gonna offer you 1 minute. All right, get your markers ready or your pens ready. I'm gonna offer you 1 minute to write down all of the Black authors that you have read. Ready? And begin. All of the Black authors that you have read in 1 minute time. All right, your 1 minute is up. All right, so let's see, hold up your papers. Who are some of the Black authors that you've read? A little closer.
I did a whole class in college, I can't remember any.
All right, so one at a time, go ahead and read them off. Bo, why don't you go ahead, go first.
Sure, to run through my list, Frederick Douglass, Maya Angelou, W.E.B. Du Bois.
I can hear him.
Can you all hear him?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. We good?
Yeah, you're good.
So my list were, in the minute, were Frederick Douglass, Maya Angelou, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Chinua Achebe.
Great list.
Jason, how about you?
Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou, James Baldwin, and I know I did a whole entire course in Caribbean literature, which was so we read a lot, but I don't remember all the authors. I'm sorry.
All right. Sujatsa, how about you?
W.E.B. Du Bois, Maya Angelou, Toni Morrison, and I'm sure there are a lot of others, but that's as far as I got.
All right, Jordan, how about you?
Sure, I have Toni Morrison, Michelle Obama, who's done a range of things, Alex Haley, J.K. Nemson, and then some familiar names, Maya Angelou, also Frederick Douglass, and W.E.B. Du Bois.
Okay, all right. How about you, Lisa? What's on your list?
Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, Maya Angelou, both of the Obamas. Read a couple of, as Jason did when I was a student in France, North African authors whose names escape me right now, at least one in particular that I thought was really, really interesting about the revolution in North Africa against the French. And Alice Walker.
Okay, all right. Anna, how about you? What's on your list?
I didn't get them all down. I'm hearing some great ones. I'm like, oh, yeah, I love that book. But Becoming was amazing. J.K. Jemisin, if you haven't read it, she's amazing. Alice Walker. Ijoma Alua, she wrote So You Want to Talk About Race. Ta-Nehisi Coates, Khalid Bey. Those are some. We all probably are like remembering. All right.
All right. All right. So we got to hear everybody's list.
Oh, I still need to.
Oh, Seth, yes.
Seth.
I had Alota Equiano, Frederick Douglass, W.B. Du Bois, Zora Neale Hurston, Ralph Ellison, James Baldwin, Toni Morrison. And then I also had some poets on there, Robert Hayden, Gwendolyn Brooks, and Langston Hughes.
All right.
Langston Hughes, good.
No, I think this is just one of our ways to get to know people. I'm always so curious. You know, who are the authors that you read? All right, so one more exercise. You ready? All right, so the first thing I want you to write down is what your, sorry, let me ask this again. What are the creative ways that you like to express yourself, right? So go ahead and write down like your own ways of expressing yourself creatively. Like, what is your artistic expression of choice? So write that down, your own personal one.
This one I can handle.
And then now I invite you again, one quick minute, to write down who some of your favorite Black artists are. All right, just 1 minute. Here we go.
In that one genre, or
Visual artists or music?
Any Black artist, yeah. All right, finish up your list and then let's share. I'm gonna start with Lisa this time.
Oh, she's muted.
Oh, hold on. Speed up. Unmute Lisa. Oh, there you are.
So I'm old. So I crochet blankets, man. It's real quirky, but
Your art.
it's my art. They're all straight lines of color, but I'm really lazy too. Cooking. I love sitting in nature and just looking out at the birds and just relaxing. And I read news obsessively, which is probably not good for my health.
And so who are some Black artists that you know and like?
I don't know any artists. Banksy's it, man.
All right. You're gonna learn some artists. You're gonna tonight. All right. Who else? Jason, you go next.
Yeah, so I make music.
Okay.
I play Detroit techno and dub, and I play live a lot around here actually.
Excellent.
And my other side is photography, pictures. So the Black artists. I'm gonna just run through a bunch of musicians, like Jeff Mills, Kevin Saunderson, Derek May, Juan Atkins, Robert Hood, Blake Baxter, Claude Young, Miles Davis. Bad Brains invented punk essentially, and then you go to dub reggae where you have like King Tubby. You can move into trip hop with Massive Attack and Tricky, and I can go on. I mean, I love this stuff. I learned how to the way I make music is actually more the way like King Tubby and them do. I use the studio as the instrument. So I learned how to, back in college, I actually learned how to do tape loops and cut tape and everything, and it's because of that. And I
That's awesome.
lose
Great.
myself in sound for days. So.
Thank you, Jason. No, thank you so much. This is so cool. Getting to know you all. Jordan, how about you? What's your creative expression and then Black artists?
Yeah, so oddly, I also write music in a somewhat similar vein to Jason. So, maybe we're going to agree to do a collaboration track or two once this is all done.
A little DJ battle.
I think that would be neat. Another town hall from like, 10 to midnight or something.
It would have to be from midnight till 3.
All right, well, we'll work on that later. So, so that's something that I enjoy doing creatively, but I also enjoy cooking and, getting out in nature, canoeing particularly. I try to take at least a 2 or 3 day canoe trip every year. And as far as Black artists, I hope you all were there with me at the Thundercat concert in Homer last summer. An amazing funk guy, also Tribe Called Quest, and having, Africa Bambaataa here with the hip hop collection at Cornell is amazing. And he played the Haunt a few years ago too. Also Flying Lotus, I believe he's on Warp Records as well, so something I've paid attention to. And some classics like Stevie Wonder, I obviously love, and I hope all of you do too.
Thank you, Jordan. And Jordan, you finished high school with me, right? 99?
I did, yep.
Remember when Tribe Called Quest came to Ithaca? We were like, I think we were probably like sophomores in high school or something.
Yeah, sadly, I don't think I was going to every show I wanted to back then, so. If only we could go back.
Were you, Anna? All right.
Oh, cool.
Thank you, Jordan. Anna, you go next. What's your creative expression? What's your art?
Well, my dancing with my eyes closed. The eyes closed part is key. It's like my meditation. So, if you see me, don't get offended. If I'm not looking at you at all, I'm just doing my thing. Singing at the top of my lungs in the woods. Love it. Just hearing it resonate in the trees and just feeling it laying on the ground is a lovely feeling. So some of the artists, Miles Davis, definitely. College for me was more Chiba and Tricky and Supreme Beings of Leisure. If you don't know them, I highly recommend them. India RE also. Movies, I loved Spike Lee's movies, but I stuck most to music. John Legend. I actually grew up listening to like Muddy Waters, Otis Redding, Aretha Franklin, Duke Ellington, Nina Simone. Nina Simone would probably be my top. Ella Fitzgerald, Sade, Misty Copeland, is more, yeah, so I have a list.
Okay, beautiful, beautiful. Well, let's go to you next. What is your creative expression? What is your art?
Sure. So my art for a long time has been photography. Unfortunately, I've gotten kind of away from that because I've been so busy. And a lot of it has been kind of iPhone photography of late, but that was my big kind of creative expression. One of the other areas that I really like to express myself in and try different things on is, I know this is going to sound kind of oddball, but canning, food preservation. I like to try different combinations of things and find esoteric recipes. My wife's favorite one that I make is a roasted hot pepper tequila jam. And we just did
that sounds great.
rhubarb syrup because rhubarbs are in season. So we do the house cocktail, which is the other area of expression is mixology. The house cocktail right now, because it's spring, is our rhubarb gin fizz, which we provide to people that come over for cocktails. So a couple of areas of different things I do for to relax a bit and express myself creatively. And then for artists, I grew up I was in college in the early 90s and so Biggie, Smalls, Tupac, will.i.am, Denzel Washington, Samuel L. Jackson, Morgan Freeman, and there's lots of different artists. I mean, I love some of the older rhythm and blues and just different things that kind of get my juices flowing. I mean, Anna's with Nina Simone. I've got Sinnerman is one of the songs I listen to when I need to run for the finish line on a race. It just gets me running and moving. And I haven't done enough of that with this campaign. We're all locked in, but I'm looking forward to getting back to my playlist. So those are the ones for me.
All right. Sujata, what's your art? What's your craft?
Well, before I became a lawyer, I was a pretty serious singer. I've been all over the world singing and sang at Carnegie Hall. And Seth and I used to be in a band together. We used to play at Grassroots. We were the Swamp College Revival, but my friend Katie said, no, we should bring it back with just the two of us as Swamp College Rivals. But anyway,
That's a good band too.
yeah. So I think it'd be fun. We should do that next. But so that I love cooking. I love theater. And I really consider change making as an art that I pour my creativity into. And even, in the law, I try to bring creativity because I'm not happy if I can't bring creativity to it. So Black artists, I started with the singers and ran out of time. There's just so many amazing Black musicians in the world, singers and musicians. So, of course, Nina Simone, Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald, Billie Holiday, Outkast, Miriam Makeba, Public Enemy, Aretha Franklin, Stevie Wonder, Otis Redding, Prince, Erykah Badu, Ice Cube, Samite. I mean, I could probably take up the rest of the forum with amazing Black artists just in the music realm, but there's so many other realms as well. Good question.
Awesome.
I was at that Tribe Called Quest show, by the way. I remember it well, yeah.
Yes. So grateful. Thank you for this. Thank you for this sharing. And I don't know. I mean, those are two things that are significant for me. And
Sorry,
for
did you want?
Beth, geez,
Okay.
why do I keep doing this to you, my friend? Go ahead.
Well, I wrote down a couple of things. I actually had mixology on there too, because that's a hobby of mine. It's something I enjoy to do. I'm like a halfway decent amateur mixologist, making cocktails for my friends. I'm also I don't really talk about this publicly very much, but I do write poetry. So that's definitely a creative outlet. Essayist, I've published some essays in the past. So that's definitely a creative outlet for me. And then I'm also a musician, as Sujata already said. We played in Swamp College Revival and in the dance tent at Grassroots. That band was enormous. It contained the entire Sim Redmond band within it. It was a lot of fun though. So, but I play piano and I play guitar. And as far as artists, I can't believe no one's mentioned the Wu-Tang Clan yet. I love them. I think they're spectacular. And I, you know, a lot of the other artists that have been mentioned, Stevie Wonder was on my list, Aretha Franklin, of course, Tribe Called Quest, also love Tribe Called Quest. This is probably aging me somewhat, but I put Run DMC down.
Yeah, you're still not going to be the oldest one here. So.
Neither are you, Jason.
Run DMC, yeah.
Beautiful. That's a little bit from everybody. I feel like I'm not giving up on you, Lisa. You need
Oh, honey, just don't make me first.
Like, you're right.
Let me be last next time.
I know. I'm coming back to Lisa. Go ahead, Lisa. Who are some Black artists that you admire or have admired in your lifetime?
Well, I mean, you know, if you're talking about music, I mean, Otis Redding, absolutely. Louis Armstrong, every day. Sade, absolutely. She's who I went to college with, you know. A lot of these musical artists, and I was even into rap when I was teaching French. My students were trying to get me to get my head around rap, and I was really loving the fact that I didn't know what it was until they were playing it for me. So, you know, I mean, all of those people. And by the way, I also sing. I sing professionally. I sing in a church choir, and I also sing in a group where we do classical music, and I do a lot of those other types of things. Certainly a lot of singing is important to me. I play the cello, I play the piano, but you know, Louis Armstrong without question, Strange Fruit, I mean, you know, all of those early, I'm really into the earlier 1930s types of music.
Excellent.
There's actually a pretty good French rapper, Lisa. Do you know MC Solar?
It's hard to listen to French
Yeah.
rap. It's hard. But it's
good.
I try.
We are so grateful for this start, everyone. Thank you so much. This has been fun to, you know, get a little taste of who you are and what attracts you. And so I'm going to take this opportunity to also introduce the fact that actually, and perhaps introduce to you some folks. So the Southside Community Center, we are hosting a virtual Juneteenth this year. And this is an opportunity for us to teach about 20 incredible Black leaders from our past, right? So if there are any folks on the list that you don't know, get to know them. But deeper than just knowing who these people are and what they did, our work right now is really highlighting what these people have to offer us now. Today, right? And recognizing the dynamics of their significant contributions. So if you study our Facebook page, we are teaching each of the 20 people. We're offering quotes associated with them and links for videos and all of that. The artist who has done all of this work and has done an image of each of the 20 people on t-shirts that we're selling for Juneteenth. Her name is Mariam Adib. She's this incredible local artist. So excited to share that with you. Given the reality of time, but the last thing that I was going to do, I'm going to make it shorter, or hopefully, I don't know. Let's see if it's shorter. The other moderators will let me know. But I actually posted the questions. It's a 3-part question. And I'm wondering, it would be easier if you took a minute to just start writing out your reaction to it. But then I'd love to go around and give you all a minute to respond. So a minute to answer the question in writing, maybe take some notes, and then I'll go around and a minute for each of you to respond to the questions. So here they are. Oh, I'm just joking. Hold on a second. Let me. Okay. Okay, so I'm just gonna ask you. I'm just gonna ask you the question. I'm just gonna ask you. All right. What are you doing to actively combat anti-Black racism in your current positions of power? That's the first part of the question. The second part is, what active steps are you taking to participate in these efforts for yourself, and your community? And then lastly, what will you do if you're elected? And so for the sake of honoring time, we just wanted to offer each of you just about a minute to respond to that question, to those questions. And so let's start with Seth.
All right, thank you.
A minute to breathe if you want to wrap your head around it, but I'm starting with you.
Yeah, so you know, I've been on the Ithaca Common Council for the last 8 years. You know, I've personally, you know, I've done a talking circle on race and racism. That was one of the first things that I did when I first got on council. As you know, it's about a 6-week program, and I think through those conversations, really just learned that for me to be the most effective representative possible, I have to be able to listen well, and I have to be able to understand the perspectives of people who have had very, very different experiences of this country than I have. You know, policies that I've worked on the council, there was an incident in 2014 where 2 Black teenagers had a gun drawn on them in the Southside neighborhood. I spent about a year working with a diverse group of community members and the police to come up with an implicit bias training. You know, I've been a supporter of the hospitality training and employment program, the HTEP program that's managed through GIAC. I've been on the board of GIAC for 8 years. Actually, I just got off the board of GIAC, but I served on it for 8 years. You know, participated in the Beverly J. Martin and the James L. Gibbs Scholarship Awards, which are given out to young students of color each year. As far as steps I'll take if I'm elected, you know, it's really struck me that especially as we've seen these demonstrations and all of the energy that's out there right now, that almost every policy that we're talking about in this assembly race can tie back to race, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, and obviously with policing. I think that it's important to take an anti-racist approach to all the legislation that we're passing, and to consider with any action that we take in Albany, whether this is a step that will dismantle legacy of institutional racism in this country, which is all pervasive. So, you know, in education, it means adequately funding our schools and ending the political games through which, you know, Black and brown districts have been shortchanged and white districts have benefited. Healthcare means passing the New York State Health Act. I'm sorry, did I see you raising your hand?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not being a very good moderator. I'll put my hand up when it's about time to end. But Seth, thank you. That was a good minute. All right, and I have the questions posted up here. Jason, how about you? How about you go next?
Okay. Well, I mean, a couple of things I've done. First off, like I'm an attorney too, so for a number of years I was on the Criminal Justice Alternatives to Incarceration Board. I actually got started in politics running for town justice because I wasn't happy with one of our current town judges. He's still there, but I wasn't happy how he would handle things like, you know, drug court. He wouldn't send clients there. And, you know, there were definitely issues with at the time bail. I would say been and do it after moving to the area a year and a half in. But since then I've been on the board. We do a lot of work on trying to have affordable housing, and we're working on a broadband project right now because so many kids in the entire town don't even have access to internet. So during this time they've been left behind already. And then I'll continue to, I guess it's a minute already.
Yeah, there you go. I'm gonna try that. I'll put up my hand.
Yeah, so, and I would do the same thing like Seth talked about too, because all the policies would, everything so ties together into race. It's you know.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Thank you. Lisa, how about, you're all set? Oh, sorry, we were disconnected. Lisa, how about you next? Hold on, let's unmute you. Or unmute yourself.
Okay.
There you go.
Sorry. Hey, so, you know, I'm actively working with our local police force. For 10 years, we funded anti-bias and de-escalation training for our police force here in the city of Cortland. We've seen a lot of changes. It's not perfect by any means, but it's really important in my view that police understand and are educated about the Black community and what they may bring to the table when it comes to troubles, and really engage in community policing. We pay for that. Our agency pays for that every year for our police force and police forces surrounding us. And it's been very effective. In fact, our Black Lives Matter march a week and a half ago, there were 3 young people who had started the march, surrounded arm in arm with 2 police officers. That does not in any way make up for the current violence against people of color in any way, but it was heartening to see that there are things that we can do to support that interaction. Actively recruiting people of color and Black women in particular, and I say women because most of the time women are the people who engage in social services treatment, so actively recruiting women of color in particular, but also men of color and Black people in our workplace in terms of our addictions counseling and mental health counseling, and supporting the Black LGBTQIA community through our center. What am I doing myself? I'm giving money to Black causes, to the NAACP and other organizations like that. They need funding to work for to help support their efforts. What am I doing myself? I'm trying to be an ally. I'm trying to shut up and listen and not appropriate the movement, but really let Black people guide their futures, because we have not done that enough. I'm trying to bring up historical information that people don't know about, the Tulsa Massacre of 1921, Juneteenth, the fact that Trump is having a freaking rally in Tulsa on Juneteenth is disgusting. If I were to start,
I'm going to stop you right there, Lisa.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Yes, a little bit over the time, but I'm so grateful. Thank you. Jordan, how about you?
Sure, a lot of my career has been based upon seeing the structural inequalities that underlie our society. So for example, I lived in Louisiana during Hurricane Katrina, and it was immediately clear who's impacted the most by that sort of disaster. It's minority communities who are in that city forced to live in places that are going to get flooded before wealthier white neighborhoods. And these same inequalities extend to New York. So this is something I've worked on with Assemblymember Lifton. And for example, the fact that our education being funded by local property taxes means that lower income communities, will end up with poorly funded schools, which limit the chance for, people to succeed in their lives, to get out of entrenched poverty and difficult situations. So I'm aware of, the structures we have in place, which continue to keep people down, often, minorities and Blacks in places that haven't had the same opportunities. But what I've been doing here in town is attending the important rallies about George Floyd, and I've been speaking out when I see people doing, taking racist actions, but importantly, listening to our, African-American experts like Dr. Philip Goff. I listened to, the other day, where should we go in terms of changes to our policing structures? This is who I look to, and as well the Black, Hispanic, and Puerto Rican Legislative Caucus. These are the folks there who, frankly, have had a lot of the bills that are finally passing for years.
Thank you, Jordan.
Oh, sorry. All right, thank you.
No, thank you so much. It's really good. Bo, how about you? Can you go next?
Yeah, so trying to take active steps to combat racism. We see this in our community and we see it in ourselves at times. Just trying to make sure that I'm really listening to the community. We've had an excellent set of rallies here in Portland. I participated in the Homer Black Lives Matter March last weekend, which was just inspiring to see so many people come together in a small rural community, as we've seen in other rural communities across the country, to say what more can we do. And in this case, I know my role on this is not to get out in front. My role is to listen, to understand, to educate myself, and to push where I can push as an elected official. One of the things that I did this week to just move the needle ever so slightly, but to move the needle, was to work with our sheriff in Cortland County to get him to finally publish our use of force policy. we have a use of force policy in the sheriff's department, but he didn't make it publicly available on the website to tell everybody what it was. So now in Cortland, all of our law enforcement departments, from sheriff to city to the SUNY Cortland, all of them now publicly have published their use of force policy. Small step, but it's an important step so everybody can see it. And now we can start to ask questions about how do we change it? How do we make it better? It has in it things like chokeholds and all. We have to address them. The state legislature is doing that. And if elected, one of the key things that I want to address is the legalization of adult use cannabis, along with that funding minority communities from that. And then most importantly, expunging convictions going back decades for small cannabis offenses. We need to lift everybody up, and we could do that financially, and we could do that through their records.
Thank you both.
Mm-hmm.
Anna, why don't you go next?
Hi, yeah, I think for me, the most important thing is that I will focus my life and my work to end white supremacy. I think that's really important, an agenda that is anti-racist. I think that having my heart in that, as a person of white privilege, I'm gonna miss things. I have internalized racism, I think, as I'm constantly uncovering things as I learn and I listen. And so I think it's important for me first to just own it, know it, and listen and learn, and then take what I hear and implement it. So I've learned a lot over the last couple weeks in particular, and focus on the SAFER Act. And how there's been a fight for years on that. And I'm glad that those are passing through. But I think what's really important, and what I'm hearing and the concern from a lot of people, is that there are investments made, that we don't just pay lip service, that there's actually money put into these offices, that there's money put into enforcement, there's money put into these databases of transparency. And so I think that that's really important, and that's something that I would prioritize, legalizing marijuana for the same reasons Bo mentioned. As far as the past of what I've worked on, I've been working on the Workforce Diversity and Inclusion Board for the last 6 years with Leslyn Claiborne-McBean, trying to increase workforce diversity and inclusion inside the Tompkins County government. And I've also worked on, we had a report that we did to reduce the jail population with alternatives to incarceration. And I worked on that for 5 years. We have focused on College Upstate initiative, community outreach work, having full-time mental health support, a drug treatment facility that is harm reduction focused. Those are initiatives that I have been putting investments in and championing. And I think that those putting efforts into alternatives to incarceration is really important, and also housing. Equity in housing is something that I have been working on and will continue to. So.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to stop you right there. There will be another opportunity to maybe share a little bit more about that. Sujata, how about you?
Well, I'm a civil rights attorney. In the last couple of weeks, I have been working around the clock because people have been calling me from all over. I'm on the national defense team of the National Lawyers Guild for the mass defense team. I do this kind of work. I teach civil disobedience and protest defense. So I've been working with Black Lives Matter activists all across the country, a lot in New York, some in Rochester, New York City, some here in Ithaca. Different activists or people have been arrested or brutalized by the police in the last couple of weeks, which there's an alarming number. I'm doing direct case representation on cases and also acting as a consultant. I've been at marches pretty much every day the last week and a half, maybe with a couple days different here in Homer and Cortland. And I, in terms of what steps I'm taking or other work, I've worked, I've done pro bono work specifically for, to support Black people and anti-Black, stopping racism against Black people. In many contexts, I've worked with Southside pro bono. I've worked with many other organizations. And I've fought really hard to try to change things like we only have white judges. And so I'm a thorn in their side, the decision makers on that, the real decision makers, constantly talking about the lack of diversity, how we only have white men as judges in this district. We're the worst in the state. So I've stuck my neck out for that a lot. But in terms of what I'm doing, I'm trying to look inside and see, I'm a woman of color, but that doesn't mean that I don't have racism that I've internalized. I grew up in this society. I'm much lighter. I'm not a Black person. Everybody does. Black people have internalized stuff too. It's a toxic cancer. And so what I would do if I'm elected is dismantle white supremacy, dismantle it in all these contexts. Yes, to all of the initiatives we talk about, but also just really talking about decarceration, stopping the industrial prison complex, property tax reform, abolishing the police potentially. We really need to get serious, and we need to go bigger, because it's just going to keep popping up unless we really start addressing it all together as a primary focus.
Thank you, Sujata. Thank you all. We had a response to those questions from everyone. Thank you. I'm actually going to now pass the mic to Siobhan to ask the next set of questions. But before I do that, I just want to say that I, again, appreciate your presence. I haven't listened to all of the forums. I haven't, so I may have missed this, but so that you all understand too, that a part of the purpose of bringing you all together is, like I mentioned earlier, this idea of honoring the specificity of the Black experience, and you all providing an opportunity to name the dynamics of your racial consciousness. For some of you, we may know of you to a degree, but I will say I don't feel like I've heard this, right? That I learned this about you from previous forums. So I appreciate the specificity. All right, Ms. Siobhan, passing the mic your way.
I'm gonna switch gears a little bit and get into just a few questions about housing and lack thereof here. So question one, kind of a long one, 2 parts, and I would like anyone that would like to answer it to feel free to. So in 2018, a bill was enacted to provide protections for individuals and families participating in the Housing Choice Voucher Program. These protections were made to eliminate the discrimination against tenants based on their lawful source of income, to include the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. Since the bill was passed, landlords continue to openly discriminate against prospective tenants. What are your views on the accessibility of housing in New York State, and what changes, if any, would you make regarding the discrimination of tenants based on their lawful source of income? So, Anna?
I think it's reprehensible. In Portland, we have a very old housing stock. There's a lot of competition for housing in the student community because half of the students at SUNY Cortland live off campus. So all of the nicer homes have been utilized for student housing or are being used in other areas for high-end apartments. Most of the people that we work every day are Section 8, are Section 8 housing residents. They're constantly being evicted, and then they're having their children taken away from them because they have no home. So I think we really need to make sure that we're working to support higher reimbursements for Section 8 housing. We need to give DSS and others who work with those individuals who are working with Section 8 more options for funding. We need to educate the community about how important it is that these people receive appropriate housing and that they have access to everything that everyone else should have. It's creating more pockets of drug abuse, of mental illness, and those are people that need our support. And when they're constantly having to be moved and constantly losing their home and then constantly be threatened by having their children taken away from them, it creates a vicious circle that just doesn't support health, well-being, or any type of advancement whatsoever.
I think everyone.
You muted, Siobhan.
That anyone can go. So Jason, if you're.
Yeah.
You
I want to add on. I don't know what order are we going.
Why don't we do Jason, Jordan, and Anna?
So in addition to what Lisa was saying, when it comes to Section 8 too, you got to make sure that the landlords who are accepting it are actually providing safe housing, because it's an issue that I actually had talked to, I don't know if anyone remembers, Tia Labrada, before she moved to New York City. She was working for the Human Resources Coalition Continuum of Care, and we had talked about actually doing some code enforcement, because right now there are landlords in this county who they're slumlords basically, and they're putting people in unsafe housing after taking Section 8 funds. The other thing, when it comes to discrimination, that has to be actually prosecuted. I don't know the extent of it now. It doesn't seem like it happens very often. And I think the way local government can really get involved in this too. Like if we don't have a licensing program in the town of Dryden yet, but if we had, if it came down to it, in order to enforce things like the continuum of care programs, we would definitely do that. But this, there are towns that have that they do license rental units, for instance. So you can definitely make sure that if someone is engaging in discrimination or providing unsafe housing, you can shut them down. And I think that's how it gets fixed. It's not just the availability of funds. It's about actually making sure that the people who are engaged in that business are doing it fairly, and then getting them out of it if they're not going to. I think everybody froze for me.
Yeah, Jordan?
Yes, sure. I had the opportunity last year to attend an American Bar Association meeting of the Civil Rights section in Baltimore. And this exact issue came up. I heard from many panelists who were, in fact, had even been veterans who returned back home and had medical problems. She lost her job and ended up on Section 8 housing, and told a, very compelling story how she went from a respected, service professional to whenever she approached a rental place and said she's on Section 8, the immediate severe discrimination to the point where, the only homes that were available were substandard at best. So, obviously that's completely unacceptable. So what I would do would be to call for a dedicated funding stream through aid and incentives to municipalities, which would go for affordable housing and would require Section 8 housing that is up to date, modern, and helps us move away from the substandard housing for anyone on this assistance program.
Anna was next. And then maybe Sarah.
Yeah, this is something I've been working on for years. This is the source of income discrimination law. I wrote the resolution locally to push the state and also lobbied at the state level through Local Progress, a progressive elected officials network. We were pushing for this, as well as the Emergency Tenant Protection Act, good cause legislation. We got some of it through last year, for example, that people can, they can't be evicted for bringing up a complaint about something that's happening, for example, in their homes. That goes hand in hand, really important with enforcement. And I think everything is about enforcement. Right now, the Department of Human Rights at the state level is underfunded. They can't do outreach. They have an office in Albany and an office in Binghamton. So we have to drive there. People can't drive there if they don't have a car, or they're working in a gig economy and they're working 14 hours a day and they don't have childcare. So the system is rigged. If they don't know they need to get a new hearing, if they've got a hearing, they miss their hearing, they're out. So the system itself is inherently biased and is a structurally racist system. We need to do investments in that infrastructure. We do need to do enforcement, and we do need a local board that's doing oversight and investigation of cases and identifying it in partnership with CNY Fair Housing. We are in their district, but we need them to be doing that work. So that partnership needs to be expanded. I could go on because I'm passionate about it. I'll stop.
Seth, did you want to say?
Yeah, so I agree with everything that's been said. The other thing I would add is that we need to create just more quality, affordable housing. because one of the problems we've seen is that as rents go up, then a lot of units are no longer Section 8 eligible, and increasingly people are pushed farther and farther out of the city, and that means that they have to drive further to get to work or to go to medical appointments or whatever. And I think that we've seen some success in Ithaca with INHS building some projects downtown. The former Immaculate Conception School, I think that's a great project because it means that Section 8 eligible tenants are going to be able to live close to BJM. They're going to be able to be close to GIAC, but it's so challenging to do because it's the finances are really tough. And frankly, the controversy, there's all pushback can be a real problem for these projects. And that's something I've been through so many of these battles, like standing up and supporting these projects. Another bill that's in the legislature is the home stability support, which would create a rental subsidy on top of the subsidy that's available from DSS right now. I think that's also a really important bill. So that would just give people, especially people who are substance abuse problems or formerly incarcerated, more options for housing.
Okay. Thank you, Seth. Siobhan, did you want to ask another question?
I'm sorry, I haven't answered yet.
Oh,
Hi.
yeah, Sujata, go ahead.
Okay, so I agree with that. I think it's really easy to get around the law on Section 8 discrimination right now because the market rate is so much higher than what Section 8 is paying. So we really need to stop incentivizing, locally even and as a state. My colleagues are incentivizing big high-end luxury development that's driving the rents up. They're giving tax abatements. They're putting the majority of our resources are going there. They've been going around affordable housing laws that they've passed and finding ways of finding a loophole to give, like the old library project, which is 100% high-end luxury, full, not only regular tax abatement, but enhanced. And we have to stop incentivizing that. We have to build affordable housing. We have to, at a state level, make that a priority. We have the money, but we spend $11.3 billion a year on corporate welfare instead of building safe housing and putting people to work. We could do both with that money. We could put people to work building it. So, that's part of what I think we need to do. Oh, could I just add one thing? Property tax. I don't think we should have property tax for primary homes and for affordable housing, especially Section 8 housing, which I think would incentivize that. And we can get that from a progressive income tax across the state.
If I could just to just quickly jump in, is that, I agree with a lot of the things that have been said today, and so I won't rehash them. Just a couple of quick little points here in Cortland. I've helped with the Move Forward, our housing inventory. In Cortland, we have not done an inventory of the affordable housing across our county. And we helped move that forward in the last legislative session so that we can understand where our housing needs located across our community. And I've also been involved actively in the fights with landlords here in Cortland. Because both Ithaca and Cortland are college towns, we see, as Lisa had mentioned, we see a lot of housing that is affordable get flipped into student housing. Because it can make a hefty profit. And that has significant impacts throughout our community. It keeps pushing people further away from our pockets where jobs are available into the outskirts of Cortland, Tompkins, Ithaca, because they're close to the universities, and that's the housing that immediately gets flipped to student housing. So we have to do better with our enforcement. And Cortland has really tried very hard to push back on the enforcement with our landlords. We, as Jason has mentioned, we have really tried to force the issue on code enforcement to say, if you're going to rent this property, it has to meet certain standards. You cannot rent to anyone in a substandard housing. And so we've really taken the lead on fighting the fight with landlords here in Cortland on that issue.
I also just want to really quickly say the social safety net has been absolutely decimated. The poverty level used to be much higher than it is today in terms of real dollars. Let's give these people money and let them get housing that's decent, clothing for their children, and food for their families, because we are not providing the social safety net financially that would help support them as they move forward in their lives.
Okay, sounds good. Which leads me to my next question. And Lisa, I'll let you go ahead and answer this one for me. What resources will you advocate for that will specifically address the disenfranchisement experienced by Black people regarding access to affordable housing?
As I just said, the poverty rate hasn't changed. It's in fact decreased over time since the 1960s. You know, we're taking away every opportunity for these people to feed their families. Food stamps are drying up. You know, work requirements for people who don't really have the ability to work because they're trying to get childcare. They can't get childcare because they don't have a job. They can't get a job because they don't have a house. They can't get a house because they don't have a job. It's a vicious circle for people. We have, and we've all said this, and I've said this many times during the other forums, we have plenty of money, we do, and I know people think I'm crazy when I say we have plenty of money. We're just giving it to the wrong people. My first class in my policy master's degree at Maxwell School was, are the schools doing a good job? It was an education policy class. And every single person in that room said, no, the schools are doing a crappy job. And I said, no, we're asking the schools to do the wrong job. They should be educating. We should be creating a social safety net with money that supports people so that they can live lives with dignity. Let's take the money. Let's stop giving money, corporate welfare, to the rich, and let's reallocate funds so that there's a progressive tax rate that allows for us to support the people that need the support until they don't anymore. And then they can help support others behind them. I would be reallocating a progressive tax, getting rid of the property tax, reallocating that dynamic of the poor feeding the rich, and turn it around.
So, Bo.
I just wanted, if I might, I just wanted to jump in with some ideas that I've come across in my listening on how to, improve the disenfranchisement. A couple of things we haven't brought up before in these forums are, we need to reestablish generational wealth in our minority communities. We have not done that as a country. And one of the things that I would really like to see move forward is Cory Booker's idea of the baby bonds. When a child is born in this country, we establish a bond for them, and we contribute to it through a reallocation of the wealth. We've talked about making the billionaires pay their fair share. This is a way that we can help reestablish. So when a child reaches the age of 18 to 20, and they're coming from a poor community, they could have $50,000 in a bond that's available to them to start to look to do something with that. They can afford an education. They can afford to put a down payment on a house in an area of the country where they might want to live. But we need to really reestablish that generational wealth that we have very purposefully in this country destroyed through redlining and other historic activities that we need to come back to. And I think some of the things that we have talked about would really help with that as well. Passing New York Health Act and making sure that everybody has a baseline of healthcare that's already covered by the state. They don't then have to worry about where's my healthcare coming from. If we establish universal pre-K across upstate New York, they get it downstate, but we don't have it upstate, then parents won't have to worry about where am I having to put my children where I'm trying to work a job. So there are baseline things that we can cover, but I think we have to reestablish generational wealth.
Anna?
Yeah, I would agree that universal childcare is absolutely critical. Right now, it's a subsidy system. Those subsidies are not sufficient. And so a lot of people are left out of that system. And right now in Tompkins and Cortland counties, 40% of the people who could be in the workforce are not. And a significant disproportionate number of the people who are not even looking for a job are women. And there's a disproportionate number of Black women in that community who are not working because they cannot get childcare because it is unaffordable and inaccessible. So just acknowledging that, and if you have a universal childcare and it is a progressive tax, then that's one piece. Also healthcare. Healthcare has crippled so many families. having universal health care makes everyone have health care, make sure, and it's a progressive tax. So those two things I think are really important. In the context though of housing, I think that it's important that we acknowledge that the very zoning structure of the way that our infrastructure is built is exclusionary, including in Ithaca. 28% of Ithaca is single family zoning, for example. I am not against single family homes in any way, but if you look at the history of the single family zoning that was designed in Ithaca in 1925, it specifically identified groups that they excluded by design because of the way that it was written. So allowing for duplexes so that young people can live in one side, rent the other, and still be able to live in it. They are small scale, they are infill, creating infill development, incentivizing affordable housing at the state level. There is also a program at the state level, 581A, in downstate that has been highly abused, so that money is given to high-end developers that create affordable housing temporarily. Then when the abatement is over, they convert it to market rate, and it happens over and over and over again. So closing loopholes, limiting tax deductions for property depreciation, closing loopholes to how landlords are taxed. These are fundamental things that shift the money, real, clear, specific things that can shift the money from high end so that it's in the community and community programs and affordable housing development. You also then incentivize affordable housing development, but that is mixed income, mixed use, not isolating and segregating low income housing. So those are just some things.
Sure, I'd like to jump in for a second. I agree very much with the idea that accessible childcare and healthcare will make a great difference in everyone's life. But I want to talk a little bit about our flawed economic development program. Right now, every year the governor ends up with hundreds of millions of dollars that he sets up local economic development panels, and all this money goes out with a big press release, a lot of fanfare. And fine, some of these projects might be great, but there's no follow-up on whether or not the actual jobs that these projects said they would create actually came through. I've seen recent studies where New York State was ranked with a D- in terms of its economic development program for exactly this reason. We're doling out money. It's time to make sure that it actually has the benefit we need in our own communities. And that means the jobs we as taxpayers are spending actually, that we as taxpayers are incentivizing actually exist in our community. And when it doesn't happen, the state needs to have the right to take that money back and yes, begin to actually fund our social service programs at the levels we all know they should be. Every single year in Albany, we get a budget from the governor, and social service programs, including affordable housing, childcare, dealing with the disabled, you name it, every single program is slashed heavily. Sometimes it's completely zeroed out. We need to stop playing games with important services that actually help people's lives and stop giving it to companies with no return. Thanks.
Sean, I think there was Seth and Sujata.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think we really need to do and incentivize at the state level is more home ownership opportunities. And, this is something I've always sort of reflected on, and, I chair the Planning and Economic Development Committee in the city of Ithaca. We have, majority renter in the city, and it's extremely difficult to find a starter home. We don't have a lot of new housing that's being built. And I think if you look at, the Southside neighborhood, if you go back in time, you would have seen that there was a lot of Black home ownership. That's really shifted over time as the housing costs have increased and the rate of taxes and everything. And it's something I hear about from constituents. I think we really need to do a better job. And I do think the state has a role in this, in figuring out how we can help home builders build more affordable homes for people to purchase, right? Because you're building equity then, and there's a major difference between renting and owning a home. And one way the state, I think, could help, some other states, especially on the West Coast, have had some luck passing laws that mandate different types of housing, like more cluster housing and more creative ideas to create home ownership. That's something the state of New York really hasn't done. And I think it's incredibly difficult to fight these battles at the local level. I know about them, right? Like I've been through this with the infill housing that Anna's talking about, fighting with neighbors all across the city to try to build new housing. I think it's better almost to do it at the state level, because then that creates a model for people to use, and you can have better comprehensive planning.
I totally agree about home ownership. I think one, these would be on the board of the Alternatives Federal Credit Union and try to help make programs to make home ownership more accessible to people. One of the issues that I and many other people have run into is, so I grew up poor. So when I started to be a lawyer, I had to co-sign my parents' house loan and other people in the family's loans and things. So my credit score looks overtaxed. So I can't get a lot of these things. I think credit scores, there's a lot of racism involved in credit scores, and there's a lot of inequality involved in them. It's not really, I've never missed a payment, but that doesn't matter with the credit score. And so I think we need to get away from that model and start some models for home ownership that aren't tied to that. I was thinking about a program where we could use Section 8 vouchers to apply towards mortgage payments, and really make home ownership programs that could, allow more people to get on that path. But then we can also do things we're in the middle of a pandemic, everything's shutting down. We're gonna have to rebuild everything. We need a Green New Deal. We can put people to work building houses right now, affordable houses. We could talk about cooperative condominium style ones where it could be affordable housing. You go in as a renter on Section 8 and you get your path. It's like to own your unit yourself. We could talk about other kinds of models as well, and not just all clustered in one area. Some people want to be out in the country maybe, or some people want to have like an eco-village style place with mixed income properties and a lot of options for affordability in that, because right now most people are priced out of that kind of ability to grow your own food and live in a community, and where you don't, you can have like passive solar and all of that. So I think there are a lot of cool options. I think the number one thing though is if we do this idea I have about the property taxes, I think we'll incentivize a ton more affordable housing, because when landlords are able to have that incentive, I think it's going to come.
Yeah. And I think everybody froze.
Jason, were you going to say something real quick?
Yeah, so I wanted to just add, so from the government side, I mean, like in Dryden, we actually joined the Community Housing Development Fund with the county, and Cornell contributes to it. I believe the city does too, because we wanted to see more affordable housing actually built in the town. And it was done. We had 4 houses go up, partnership with Habitat for Humanity. So really, it comes down to money and to fund programs like that. And the state can do more if it actually taxes the 1% more, because the funding is available. And if we move, like I've talked about this from the beginning of this race, about shifting from a property tax to progressive income tax, because I actually moved back to New York from Maryland, where they have less of a reliance on property tax. They have a progressive income tax, so people can actually purchase homes a little bit more easily. But the other thing that's really holding people back, we haven't talked a lot about in this race, is student loan debt. What we need to do is find a way to make education a lot more affordable, whether it's college or trades, because when you come out of school with tens of thousands of dollars in debt, you don't have the money to put down towards a house or even a condo or whatever. It doesn't matter how many government programs you're on as a first-time home buyer, even or whatever. So we really need to fund our secondary education and trade schools, and take because back in the 60s, when my father was able to go to college and in New York City, he actually went for free. And why can't we do that now? And I think that if you eliminate the student loan debt, have actual real programs to build affordable housing, then you'll allow people to Black community to build wealth, which is really like what Bo mentioned. You have to have that, because in the end, that's gonna be a great equalizer.
Okay, so I think I just am going to ask two people this next question. Jordan, I'd like to hear from you on how will your work address homelessness?
Sure, you know, homelessness is often a result of several other underlying problems in our society. So first of all, lack of housing, lack of accessible, affordable housing. So I did discuss my idea to make sure we're dedicating state money to every community across the state through, you know, a formula. And there's a lot we can do to raise that money. You know, stock transfer tax, millionaires tax, pied-à-terre tax. You know, we have, as others have said, we have a lot of money and we have some of the wealthiest people in the world here in our state. There's no reason we can't accomplish robust funding for what we need most. But, you know, unfortunately, many homeless are also, you know, may have medical problems, mental health problems. You know, this is why I will also fight for single payer healthcare and to restore those essential social service programs that I mentioned earlier. You know, this is something, again, the governor, you know, zeroes out in our budget every year, knowing that the legislature will add back in money. But, you know, we're not doing enough. We're keeping it level. We get increases every now and again. You know, we need to recognize that mental health crisis underlies much of our other societal problems. So I will focus on this in Albany from the get-go. And I already have strong relationships with the groups who work on this. And I'd like to work with you to build a coalition to help me make the changes we want to see in January in Albany.
So Sujata, would you like to answer that question as well?
Could you just repeat it so I have the specific question? What initiatives could help homelessness?
How will your work address homelessness?
No, housing is a human right. And I think we need to come from that perspective. It's actually codified in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I used to work in a homeless shelter though, and I know that for some people, homelessness involves many other factors. There are some people who don't want to be in a shelter or indoors. They want their own independence and are very, you know, a lot of PTSD, a lot of drug addiction involved, and then a lot of families that just, you know, can't find affordable housing. So there's all different kinds of needs that need to be met when you talk about homelessness. First, we need the housing. So all the people that are homeless, which is far too many, or housing insecure, have that. And then we need to also address ways of you're figuring out what to do about drug addiction systematically. We do need more treatment facilities. We do need more care that's oriented to addressing the root causes and to helping people build up and empower themselves. Because even if we have the housing, if we have, you know, that might solve some of it. And then for people with PTSD, I mean, I'd like to get a crew of people who are homeless together to help work on a coalition to really address that. I met some really amazing homeless people when I was a teenager. I started hitchhiking around the country. I lived in the park in Boston and I sold homeless newspaper there. And I had a lot of friends that lived in the park there too. And they had some really great ideas about how to deal with the people with severe PTSD and other people who just really didn't want to be part of a system, but really did need whatever supports we could give them. So I'd like to get homeless people involved on a council of talking about what to do about homelessness so that we can make sure that we're not forgetting any of the issues or letting people fall through the cracks when we just, you know, provide housing.
Siobhan, can I just say something briefly in answer to that question? You know, the whole mental health and addictions issue is so huge. And I don't know anybody who is not dealing with someone who has had some trauma or some mental health or some addictions issues that need to be addressed. Right? Why are we in the position we are now? Those of you who are working in Albany already, Why are we in the position we are now? I have not had an increase in my funding in 10 years, not one. It's a travesty. Why aren't you giving me flexibility? I can't go to a homeless shelter and provide mental health services. It has to be in a building and it has to be face-to-face and the office has to be 100 square feet and I'm only allowed to do it for 45 minutes plus 5 minutes for documentation. And then when I do all of that stuff that I'm supposed to do, the Office of the Medicaid Inspector General comes in and takes money away from me because they say, you forgot to change a date. As far as I'm concerned, we're in this position many times because healthcare has not been addressed already, and this has been allowed to do whatever he wants when we've had every opportunity to support mental health and addictions, and we aren't spending the money. I can't believe the arguments and the challenges I'm having right now with the Office of Mental Health, who doesn't want me to be able to continue to provide telehealth. And you know why? Because we have show rates of 80% now, and the Office of Mental Health is saying, but that means you'll access more Medicaid dollars. We don't want high show rates. That's disgusting. Why are we in the position we're in now? You've been in Albany all this time. People have been working on this. No, the governor has been allowed to push benefits for the rich down the throats of the Assembly and the Senate, the Assembly in particular with the IDC and that Republican Senate. Now is our time to really do something about this. And it does all start with trauma-informed care, dealing with people with ACEs, and actively working to support school-based clinics, school-based trauma clinics, and flexibility in providing mental health and addictions treatment. We have none of those. Sorry, I really feel strongly about this, as you can tell.
All right. All right.
Yeah.
Can I give a brief answer? I think the bill that I mentioned before, home stability support, would help a lot because, as I said, it would create that rental subsidy to help people who are facing eviction or facing homelessness as a result of eviction or domestic violence. I also think we need to build more supportive housing. The state committed to 20,000 units of supportive housing a few years ago, and I know that hasn't really been realized. And then the last thing is that I think we need to invest more in community outreach worker models. We have an example of that with Tammy Baker, who's the Family and Children's Services position here. But I think that model, instead of allowing the police to respond to all of the homeless problems, I think we need to create sort of like a network of on-the-street social workers who can help people get connected to housing and services.
How's it going to be paid for, Seth? How's it going to be paid for? Every single solitary thing I do, I have to worry about how I'm going to get reimbursed for it. Every single thing.
Well, I can tell you, we pay for our current program.
The county does.
The county, the city, and the Downtown Ithaca Alliance does.
And when there's a 20% cut in county funding, are you going to have to cut her services by 20%?
Well, I think that's the conversation we need to have. And I think that's an example of what we're hearing with these calls to defund the police, which may seem radical to some, but I think essentially what it means is that we're taking money that maybe would be going to law enforcement and repurposing it.
Because we're providing mental illness by jail now.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
mental health
if
services
you end up,
by mental health professionals.
yeah, I mean, what you need to do is also just build more housing. Like we have second wind cottages in Newfield. One reason why that could actually be built there is because they don't have zoning. So there's a lot of, we talked about zoning earlier that's exclusionary. Zoning does prevent affordable housing to be built, but some people need to be in certain, group home settings, and the state laws already allow those
I just want to add one thing that I feel like really
or
needs.
a city or a village doesn't want it.
Jason, sorry, I thought our screen
I don't know
froze.
if you can anyway. I don't know if I'm breaking up, but anyhow, the housing just needs to be built. Really, is what we need. That would help the most.
Yeah, I was just going to add one thing, Siobhan, to answer directly your question. I think that it really needs to be noted that about 57% of the heads of households who are in shelters are Black, and about 37% of them, or 32% of them, are Hispanic. I think that we need to first acknowledge that there is a tremendous disparity I want to note something else that we have seen in the Public Safety Committee at the county, that although 4.5% of the population in Tompkins County is Black, 24% of the population in the jail is Black. So let's just own that, because we know that being in jail destabilizes households. You're more likely to lose your job. You're more likely to lose your home. You're more likely to lose your connections to any social services, because you lose those when you're in jail. So it destabilizes households. So we need to own that and recognize that if there's a disproportionate amount of people who are Black and brown who are going to jail, there's going to be a disproportionate amount of Black and brown people who are going to be homeless. So yeah, we need the community services. Absolutely, we need to recognize that a significant reason why people are ending up in jail is because of mental health issues, drug-related issues. But we also know that drug-related charges are significantly higher, particularly marijuana, for example, among the Black population, as well as the Hispanic population. So all of these are correlated, and if we don't acknowledge that, and we don't address them, and we don't do the community services and shift the emphasis from putting money into the police and putting money into these community services, we are going to continue to see this disproportionate amount of Black and brown people who are going to jail and ending up disproportionately more homeless.
I agree. I think this is a great segue actually into Michael. Let me pass the mic to Michael next, who has a.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I've really appreciated hearing what everyone has to say. My questions, I think we've sort of touched on them a little bit, so I'm going to, what I'm going to do in the interest of time is I have 2 questions here, and I will ask them to specific people, and just at random, whoever like I sort of look up and see on my screen here. But I would encourage, because this is a very, these topics we're going to be talking about is police, jail, mental health, et cetera. I would encourage you to, with this captive audience, make sure that people are aware of where you stand on these issues, and make sure that you are posting them on your various social medias and things like that, just in case we don't get to you, because I want to make sure that we get to the other moderator as well. So first and foremost, we're all aware of what's going on in the world right now, not just in the United States, but all over the world. We're seeing protests and people taking to the streets to protest the unrest that is happening, when it comes to police brutality, things that have existed in this country since its inception. The police, as we all know, as a short history lesson, the police sort of came about in this country as a response to the end of slavery, and the brutality and the things that we're seeing now isn't necessarily something that's new. It's just something that is being uncovered because of technology being as it is today. So with that being said, my first question, and I'll just ask Bo, do you support defunding the police? And if so, what specifically do you think the fund should be, where do you think specifically the fund should be allocated? You're gonna unmute yourself there, Bo.
I've thought about this quite a bit of late and listened to different voices on this issue. And at the moment, I tend to agree with Congresswoman Bass, the head of the Congressional Black Caucus. The idea of defunding the police or disbanding the police, I don't think we're there yet. But I will say that for me, I've always said in my elected office that budgets are moral documents. They reflect who we are and what we believe at a town level, at a county level, at a state level, and at a national level. And I think we really need to look across our budgets to say, where are we making the investments we need to make and make the adjustments that are needed. I absolutely agree that the police should not be providing mental health services. That's not their job. Jails are not mental health clinics, which is why in the last legislative term in Portland County, I was able to push forward in a bipartisan manner to allow Portland County to join the Stepping Up Initiative. The Stepping Up Initiative's focus is to make sure that people with mental illness are moved out of our criminal justice system. They're moved out of our jails. We took that action in Portland County. We're one of only 9 counties in the entire state that has taken that initiative and has taken that pledge. Tompkins County has not taken that pledge and has not taken that step. So we've done it here in our rural community because we believe that the police need to be focused on keeping individuals safe, keeping individuals free from harm, but there are services that need to go to the right spots. Jails are not the right spots for people with mental illness. I also fundamentally believe in the bail reform acts, because for small offenses, there is no reason to bring somebody through the criminal justice system. We have seen for too long bail used not as a promise to return to court, which is what it's meant to do. We're using it as a punishment for poor individuals to say, we're going to lock you up, we're going to keep you here because you're going to put you in to the machinery of justice, and we're going to lock you into the machinery of justice. For far too long, we've seen this happen. And I have pushed back here in Cortland County to say, we have to support these bail reform measures because it is important to make sure that we don't destroy families, we don't destroy people's ability to get housing, we don't destroy the people's ability to have a job simply because they have been caught up in the criminal justice system for small offenses and they're unable to make bail. So I totally support bail reform. But at the moment, defunding the police, I don't believe we're there personally, but I do believe we need to look at our budget across the board, not just the police, but all aspects of our budget to say, where do we sit morally with how we're spending our money?
Thank you. Seth, same question, please.
Yeah, so, I think after Ferguson, there were a lot of reforms that police departments all across the country put in, body cameras, implicit bias trainings, the community policing initiatives. But, as we're seeing that, they're not enough. And we still have major problems with George Floyd and Taylor. And I think there's an exhaustion right now and a real uncertainty and question of how do we move forward with police reform? And that's why you're hearing these voices saying we need to have a radical re-envisioning of the police. We need to defund police departments. But I think defunding police departments can mean different things. Like I brought up the example of the community outreach worker. We have had a whole conversation about the law enforcement assisted diversion program in Tompkins County. The idea behind that program is to hire basically, again, outreach workers so that the police can divert somebody who has a substance abuse problem into a program so that they can get help. That means that person is not going to be going into the criminal justice system. And you could argue that that is an example of defunding the police because you're investing money in services, you're investing money in people's treatment instead of actually funding the police. And I think the police themselves would admit to this, that they're being asked to do too much in our society. They're not teachers, they're not social workers, they're not housing advocates, but they're asked to respond to all of these problems that are a result of our institutional neglect as a society, that we have failed to adequately invest in our people. We've certainly failed to adequately invest in our Black Americans.
Thank you for that, Seth. Again, I'm sorry, we're pressed for time and I want to get a couple more questions out there, or at least one more question. As you all know, my background is in mental health and I do a lot of work in vulnerable communities surrounding mental health. So my question that I'm going to put out there is, what policies or requirements would you set for any mental health service receiving federal funding that ensures that Black folks have access not only to services, but a diversity of mental health services. And I want to stop and want to pull aside when I talk about diversity of services, because all of you, when you have spoken about mental health and providing mental health services, have mentioned social workers. And I have absolutely nothing against social worker, but I was trained as a drama therapist. And I have people in my life and colleagues of mine that were trained as counseling therapists, as music therapists, as dance and movement therapists, people who provide alternative services for communities and stuff like that. So I want to sort of see if you can touch more on the diversity of mental health services being provided and what you will do. Outside of this format where we have social work being this, I don't even know what to call it. It's like a juggernaut that exists in our system. So if you could touch on that, Sujata, please.
Sure. I mean, well, passing the New York Health Act is the #1 step we can take, because once we do that, we're not going to have your choice of provider tied to the kind of insurance that you have. And that's a big problem. So, and more providers, providers will have to take more. So we also, though, have to work on, there's a lot of providers that won't take any insurance at all. And so then, you know, we have this problem where you don't get access, and it's often some of the most sought after providers that don't take any insurance at all. So we've got to work, when we pass the New York Health Act, on incentives to get them in. And also we have to have, you know, I don't know what it's going to be, but we have to make it so that there is a way for all providers to be covered by insurance in a way that makes it affordable for them. That's probably paying more fair rates, and making it less attractive to go out on their own, because everybody deserves to have that kind of choice.
Yeah, thank you. Jason, if you would mind.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the thing that, I think what you're trying to really touch on is there's different types of therapy and different types of therapists. It's not just the traditional model that we see. I mean, most of my clients in court end up going to somebody who might not actually even be able to relate to their experience. So that I think is what we need to do, is have more, I don't know, I guess therapy geared towards the type of trauma that people experienced. Because, you know, someone like me, I know for a fact that is why I tell my clients, even when they're talking to me, I'm like, I'm not a therapist. I know that. I'm not going to identify with how the trauma that they experience, and I want to help them find someone who can. But the fact is, like, even county mental health here doesn't have people who can actually help everybody. And even with the limited services they have, there are some people who do not respond to group therapy. They need individual. And even then, I've had child clients who they need to go to, I don't know the terminology of it, but if you send them to, say, a family and children's services traditional therapist, it's not going to work. But whereas there are other types who are not even under insurance, like Sujata's mentioning, where that will help them out. But more so, it's really about, I guess, so in the end, you're talking about remaking the idea of mental health services from the traditional model of go down and talk to somebody, to maybe, like you said, act things out, or I guess it's really just about broadening our view of what mental health treatment really is, and so that, but covering it all so that people are not, going bankrupt or something just to get the help that they need. Right. And then but the last thing too is, like, with this crisis, a lot of things can be done by telehealth now too, because one of the problems that I've seen in my caseload in family court is that if people are ordered by the court or DSS to go to a therapist, in the past they'd have to come down to Ithaca for the appointment. And if they live in some place like Groton or way out in Enfield where there's no reliable transportation, they can't get there. So what Lisa's been talking about how her the appointment rate is going up, which is great. We need to continue this option of telehealth for therapy, because more people are being served now, and we can continue that even when we're able to get together again. So again, it's about changing the traditional models.
Can I just jump in for 1 second? I'm sorry, the kick cut off again. I just want to note too that honestly, I feel like it's a state of priorities. Right now, we're putting a ridiculous amount of money into our police. We're pushing to have police in schools. And what we should be focusing on and prioritizing is the fact that what we need in schools is more, is more support for the teachers, better pay for the teachers, not, police right now in schools. And honestly, we look at where our priorities are. We are putting investments into police, and the Black and brown community doesn't feel safe, nor are they protecting police. That is a state where you're seeing more mental health issues and crisis and stress that are a result of that. And then we're not investing in the community. We are not investing in mental health. We are not investing. And the last thing I'll say is the state laws are designed for scope of practice restrictions right now so that there are certain therapists that can't be there. That is a state level policy adjustment. So when you look at your profession, that is not, you don't have access to that. They can't be in certain schools because your field is not eligible. So it needs to be addressed at a state level. We need to look at priorities, where we're putting our money. Right now, we're putting it into the policing state, and we're not putting it into the community in the way that people feel safe. Sorry, I had to say that.
I appreciate that. I'm going to ask squeeze in one more question here. And just as a sort of segue into this question, I want to encourage you all and everyone who is listening to find out about these different kinds of therapies that exist in the world, the arts therapies, whether it be music, drama, dance and movement, art, poetry, all of those different therapies. Because in New York State, in order to be a licensed creative art therapist, you have to have some sort of credentialing from the state. The state requires you to have what's called an LCAT, which is a licensed creative arts therapist. So all of these creative arts therapists are licensed by the state, but just like you said, Anna, they're not allowed to have such a large scope in the amount of clients that they can sort of take on. A lot of them do wind up going to private practices, or they get additional credentialing so that they can practice and live, basically. So segueing that into, I want to talk a little bit about health. I'm not sure, we talked about, providing health services and making this equitable across the board. But one of the things that I want to talk about is the fact that within these health systems, there is built in a whole lot of structural racism, to the extent that particularly Black women are dying because their doctors aren't believing them when they're reporting the amount of pain or the amount of medical issues that they're having. So I'm wanting to know what policies or requirements would you set for any hospital or clinic that receives federal funding to ensure that Black people, particularly Black women, are provided with equitable support and treatment. So Lisa, can I go with you, please?
As long as I get to come back and answer the other question.
Sure, yeah, I definitely realize that this is your area, so I know you're, yeah. So
sorry, I'm dying here.
Please, go ahead.
So the nurse to patient ratio has to be changed. The nurse to patient ratio has to be adjusted. There has to be a minimum number of nurses to a maximum number of patients. Now that needs to go the other way, because the nurses are the individuals who really do get a sense of what level of pain and how to convey that to the doctors. In addition, we really need to make sure that we are paying appropriately for healthcare so that doctors don't have to do 15-minute visits for productivity, because we've made our healthcare system about money, not about care. And when you're worried about productivity, 15 minutes becomes 10 minutes, 10 minutes becomes 5 minutes. And if you're somebody, a woman of color, or if you're even anyone, this is before, especially older men, not to be gender specific, but this is a serious concern. If you don't even want to go to the doctor, you're afraid to talk to your doctor, and your doctor comes in and says, what's the problem? And all he wants to do is write a script, because all we do is talk about, get them in, get them out, give them some pills and let them be done. How can we spend the time to help individuals really examine where their pain is coming from and how to get them to feel comfortable sharing where that pain is, especially in OBGYN settings, when oftentimes that's just not something that an individual might feel comfortable speaking with a male doctor about. So, certainly making sure that we're paying for health, not for medicine. And the New York State Health Act can do that, because it will provide doctors the time, as in the Mayo model and the Cleveland Clinic model, to really listen. And we have to create sensitivity around that. We also have to train our physicians better. The way we train our physicians now is, again, these 24-hour cycles where they aren't getting any sleep. They start to look at patients as numbers and not as people. So sensitivity training there in our medical community when it comes to education will be super, super important. And we aren't doing it now. And finally, allowing women, in particular, women of color, to feel comfortable saying, wait, I'm not done yet. And I don't think we do that. We're all dismissive of women's pain. We're all dismissive of women's concerns oftentimes. And women of color, unfortunately, are often the last ones to really be heard. And we need to help change that by encouraging doctors to be educated, to try and encourage and listen more. And then certainly the patient to nurse ratio is important, because the nurses really are the ones that have the ear to the ground when it comes to the patients and the patient's concerns.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Jordan to answer that question, and let Lisa, I'm going to come back to you so you can finish up, and then I'm going to move on. So Jordan, please.
Sure. You know, I absolutely agree with what Lisa's saying, but what I would like to see would be actually having more Black women as the doctors themselves. You know, this is something, one of these structural inequalities I keep discussing. You know, how many Black women enter a hospital and, you know, rarely see someone who understands, you know, where they're coming from and has, you know, same background, same identity. So yes, you know, we need to train our doctors and our staff to, you know, not be treating patients like a number, and not be dismissive of, you know, the very real concerns from women, women of color. But what we need to take a strong look at is making sure our education system is well funded so that Black girls who may have a dream to become a doctor have a clear path to get there. We discussed earlier, you know, someone went to school or someone's father went to school and they could go for free. Well, that was the mission of our SUNY schools when they were founded. And a lot of people have forgotten this, but the point was to have a school that's accessible, both in terms of income and is within a 1 hour and 30-minute drive of every New Yorker's home across the state. Now the schools are still there, but they're not affordable. We need to change this. We need to develop a plan to actually require our schools during times where there's a lot of money in our state, during good times. They need to not be raising tuition, and we need to not accept tuition that's raised during economic downturn. This is something, you know, we're facing a lot of economic pressures now. I would not be shocked, at least, to see the SUNY system say we need to raise tuition on middle-income families and use that to subsidize poorer families. That's happened before. We need to stop that. And if there is a tuition increase, and in 3 to 5 years when our economy is good, we must demand a plan to reduce tuition. We can't just accept increases over time that are never dealt with. So, you know, there's a lot of barriers to this, but I would like to work on how we can get, you know, more minority students into these positions and, you know, reform our medical system from within that way.
Thank you. Go ahead, Lisa.
So you're absolutely right, Michael, that the NASW has been lobbying the governor and the state every 3 years to limit the scope of practice of anybody who's not a social worker. And every 3 years, the governor has allowed us to continue to have others provide those services in both documentation and in diagnosis. So we have LCATs, LFTs. We need to get parity when it comes to peers and allowing peers who are skilled and who are trained to be able to provide mental health and addictions counseling, because peers bring so much to the table and they are not being paid even close to parity. So they can't even afford to work as a peer because they can barely afford to eat on the small amount of money we're giving them. I also think, you know, I give kudos to the Ithaca, the Tompkins County Ledge, because you still support family and children's at about $250,000 a year. They need that funding because they're not able to make ends meet on reimbursement. Unfortunately, Cortland County is only one of 2 counties in the state that don't provide any direct support for any addictions services in the county at all. And I think that makes it very, very difficult to continue to provide services. And I think we need to make sure that we have flexibility to meet the client where he or she is and provide the services that person needs, whether it's through a creative arts therapist, a marriage and family therapist. We're trying to get out there in our mobile outreach vehicles to meet people who are suffering from substance use in their homes and provide them services there. We're being threatened to have those services cut. Telehealth is more than just sending a van out there. It's more than just having somebody press a Zoom button. We have to be able to be patient-centered in our care, and we're not right now. What we are is underfunded, underappreciated, overregulated, and provided no flexibility to meet the patients where they are. So why would I have a social worker support a family who needs marriage and family therapy? because they see things as a system. And when I bring all of those people together under one roof in one clinic, they can share resources and they can share philosophies to create a more robust service model. And finally, the schools, absolutely, we should be talking to every school district and every school teacher about adverse childhood events and how they can look through a different lens at what those children are experiencing at home. But we don't provide funding for that either. We have to get private grants to train teachers to recognize adverse childhood events. And then these things become generational problems. We're not providing the funding we need or the flexibility for mental health and addictions counseling, and it's a travesty. So when we say defund the police, certainly we should be demilitarizing the police. You could provide 5 counselors, I bet, for 1 tank for 5 years. That's what we need to be looking at. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you for that. And thank you all. And again, I apologize that I didn't get to get to everyone, but for the interest of time and want to be respectful of your time, I'm going to move this over. And Richard, you have the floor.
All right, everyone. So this is kind of going to be a speed round. We'll see how this goes. If, like I mentioned earlier, if you just agree, just say I agree. If you don't, or if you have other opinions, you're welcome to state that. I will actually like to start with you, Jordan. I noticed, obviously, you've had 10 years working with Assemblywoman Lipton. Would you mind describing to me, or at least to us, what are areas that Assemblywoman Lipton could have improved that would have improved the life of Black folks here in the 125th District?
Sure, I would say we have often faced difficult budgets over that time period, and I don't think that the focus always ends up in the right place. We're discussing the idea that we have a property tax funded education system, right? So we know if you're living in a community that doesn't have a strong wealth base, we know that that's going to hurt inherently the opportunities you have as a family, as a child. We know what helps increase prosperity, both as a state and as an individual and as a family. It is education. So, I believe, years ago, we should have been moving away from any sort of property tax-based system to fund our education. This is what leads to institutional and intergenerational poverty or lack of access at the very least. That's one area in which, we need to make a stronger push. I would also say that, everything we're doing here is a decision, right? So we don't tap into money from the wealthy. We don't tap into Wall Street money. This isn't something that is just, occurring and we can't control it. This is happening because we're not building the political will to make it happen. So in Albany, I would very much like to work with you and work to build a strong coalition. We have a new day with a Democratic legislature, and I believe next year we can make some of these reforms happen, and we can bring money back where it's needed into our communities and create opportunities for Black, brown people, and hopefully for all of us. But what we need to do is look at communities that have for generations not been adequately taken care of. And that's what I would begin with.
Okay. My question to you, Jason, is you talked a good, or at least it's been reported about your efforts as far as, or your concern about local broadband and essentially having local towns establish their own broadband services. How can you assure that towns are not limited, the broadband service is not limited to how much the town can actually afford? What happens to the towns that aren't necessarily as financially capable as other towns? How will you assure all around there is high quality broadband access?
Well, my idea is to create a state fund that will be able to back up the financing. Like a town like Dryden, for instance, we'll be covering hundreds of miles of road. Okay.
I think you're cut off here.
backing it up. Way
Hey, Jason, I think I'm going to have you repeat your answer. I'll give you extra time a little bit. You kind of cut off a second. Okay. We're going to wait for him to get back to us. I'll move on to the next question. This is more of a question that I pose to everyone in terms of being able to answer. The first question is, how will you fund a restructuring of education to support families who've had less access to distance learning?
Laptops for everybody.
Okay. Anyone want to add to that?
Yeah, I would add to that. I think that it's really important that we recognize that in if it was about 2006, there was a state case that recognized that the low-income communities, primarily disadvantaged Black and Brown communities, were not receiving the same amount of quality education. They had larger classrooms, they did not have aides, they did not have supports. And that was a state ruling to invest in the foundation aid, and that increased over time, and there started to be an improvement that happened. But in 2008 to 10, when we had the economic crash, foundation aid was cut significantly, and there was a complete reversal of any of the steps forward that were made during that time. Since then, the amount of funding that has gone into education as a whole has increased, but not for the foundation aid specifically. So that absolutely needs to be the focus of the state, that the foundation aid is increased. That was cut about 40%. And the investments this year that should
about
also—
10 seconds here.
Excuse me?
Got about 10 seconds.
I think it needs to be noted that education funding was kept stable this year, but it was actually a huge cut, and there was tons of federal money that was put in to backfill that. So what we can expect next year is potentially a cut in education. So we absolutely need to focus on foundation aid, which is specifically targeted to Black and Brown communities.
So, in my next follow-up question, Sujata, did you want to add?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, we're still breaking the law. We're not following the court case. We're far below what we're supposed to be funding schools with. That needs to change. I think we need to restructure also to have, I'm not sure if you're talking specifically just about while we're distance learning or not, but if it's not just that, we do need to just restructure a lot. We're still having too much high stakes testing, too many, you're trying to teach our kids through a computer screen. And when we do get back in person learning and do more, I think we need to invest more in teachers, because they're the ones who know how to teach kids, and less in big corporations that say that they're going to, we have to pay them millions of dollars from each district to just get their software and teach our kids. And we less in policing teachers, because we don't need to be policing teachers. They're the experts. They're the ones who should be given the funding. We need to cut back on all the emphasis on trying to act like they aren't doing their job, and focus more on paying them properly and giving them the resources that they need to do it.
So my next question, and I'll let you, Seth, start answering this question. Seth, I should say. Sorry, someone with my last name should know better as far as being specific with names. I'd like to know, so obviously, or as you were made aware in the beginning of this, Southside is having what essentially is a Black curriculum for lack of absence of Black folks in the actual education system here is in the US, and obviously in New York State and in the 125th district. What ways, as far as, or what policies would you implement to assure that folks are receiving more of a complete education, particularly when it comes to funding the school districts here? What requirements would you set to make sure that we have a more complete education? So not just Black folks, but obviously other significant figures, but here we're talking about Black folks. So how do I get my Black folks in this classroom?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. And of course, I know how important the Afrocentric mission is to Southside Community Center. I mean, that was a few years ago, we had a whole debate about the city investing in Southside and consolidating with Southside, and that's what came up. It was important to maintain that independent identity and the Black identity. As far as our school curriculums, I think there's entire swaths of the Black experience in America that don't get enough attention in our schools. I mean, I think of just the scourge of lynching in the 1890s and throughout the early 20th century that happened. That honestly, I don't think a lot of white America just knows how awful this terror campaign was, and because they're not taught about it in schools. I can tell you that I was not taught about it. We learn about slavery, but there's a whole other bunch of experiences that tie into the Black experience in America that white people, I think, need to learn about. All people need to learn about, and that needs to be part of our curriculum. So I think, this is an issue that actually came up in the last forum with the LGBTQ. There was a question about this. I think learning about the history of LGBTQ issues in this country and like the Stonewall riots, it's the exact same thing with the Black experience. And I think we need to do a better job with our curriculums, just to teach about Black history and foreground it. It's like what Dr. Niaz referred to, that unapologetic specificity.
So how exactly would you get that done? I know that's the right thing to do, but how exactly would it get done?
I think you have to change the laws to make sure that certain things are actually taught in the schools. I think that's, there's choices about everything we teach to our kids, right? And I think you have to mandate that certain topics are taught. And of course, the question of what those topics are is a question that will be left up to legislators. I mean, I could probably sit here and describe to you a dozen different things, that involve Black history that are not being adequately taught right now. But I think that, we need to pass laws to ensure that our kids are getting, an adequate education about what the Black experience is in America.
Okay. My next question is to Lisa. This is in regards to just, these different programmings, particularly having to do with like Department of Social Services, things of that nature. How are you able to assure, what tends to happen in these programs is that they tend to be either under-supported or overwhelmed to some degree, or maybe have folks in the office that aren't necessarily so passionate about their jobs. That often leads to issues with the other services like the youth advocacy programs that essentially are their branch programs to help the clients that they work with. How will you assure that these particular services either receive more funding, particularly to the 125th district, and why should the 125th district receive more funding in regards to this than any other district?
Well, again, and people might say it's the easy answer, but it is about money. Because you're underfunded in the DSS program, you tend not to be able to pay staff as well as they should be paid. And as a result, they're spread very, very thin. And then everything sort of devolves into this punitive fashion of doing business with their clients because it's easier. And, some of these people have the hardest jobs in the world, and not giving them funding for ACEs training so that they can understand how adverse childhood events impact the way individuals who are victims of trauma might be dealing with specific situations makes it even harder. So I think we should be educating our communities as a whole about ACEs, but we really have to change the dynamic. We have to make sure that we're funding these social services programs in a way that we're looking at them as investments in our future, not just costs. And until we start changing that conversation, we're really going to be looking at, well, this is the first place we got to cut because, those people don't vote anyway. I think we really need to make sure that we're looking at a safety net, and that the county, their benefit is because they know what our people need and who they are. Instead, what you end up with is, well, she got her nails done, so she shouldn't get any money. And I also think we have to give them supports in terms of being able to break the cycle of, again, you lose your job, you lose your housing, you lose your kids. There's been great effort in trying to keep families together, and that's been
about 20 seconds here.
But it isn't enough. It's about readjusting the dynamic, and again, demilitarizing the police, taking some of that funding away from from policing, and investing it in those long-term programs that can see long-term benefit.
So, Jason, a lot of the argument to what particularly Lisa just mentioned from conservative folks is this: how do you know that these are garnering results? How do you know it's not a waste of money? How do you intend on convincing your conservative counterparts in the assembly that these are funds that are worth making or spending?
Well, it's actually this is a great question because when I'm in family court representing a family where kids have been taken away from them, they will put these children in foster care. And I've had clients who lost their children because their housing was deemed like inadequate or like they lost their job, like Lisa said. If you put that foster care money towards rent for that family, they're not going to lose their kids. It's the same argument why we have the OAR program in Tompkins County to bail people out, or why the whole bail reform. If you don't have people losing their jobs first off, or losing basically the daily cost for, like, say, foster care and even putting someone in jail is about $80 to $100 a day per, like, for the foster care for per child, and for incarcerating somebody. That money is better spent just by giving people homes. So that way they are going to have the stability. You're not going to need these social services. And on top of that, if we actually pay people a living wage, you're not going to need as many of these social services either. So why don't we start doing that on top of everything else? It really comes down to a fiscal argument. And that's how we actually reached a lot of conservatives when we built the
You got about 10 seconds here.
solar farms in Dryden, because those things produce revenue. They might not believe in climate change, but they do believe in getting property tax from the solar company to pay for schools and lower their property taxes. So that appeals to their self-interest. It might not be the you're breaking up a little bit. Sorry, my internet connection's really funky right now.
It's all right. And while we're talking about the internet connection, Bo, my question to you, in terms of, you talked about the Rural Electrification Act. What is it about that act that you personally appreciate, and what is it about that act that will actually ensure that the Black residents in the 125th district are beneficiaries of this act?
Sure, and that's a great question. Thank you. I believe fundamentally in New York that we need to treat broadband for everyone, rural, across the state, as a public utility. We cannot allow a patchwork of small access networks to try to grow, because they don't work. We've seen this across the country. These small patchwork of programs just don't work. They expect to recoup their costs because a few rich individuals tie into the program, but it leaves so many people behind. This is why we have to look back to our history of the Rural Electrification Act, where we as a nation said, we have got to move our country forward. We have to move everybody forward, not just the wealthy, not just the middle class, but everybody. And we were able to establish, through the Rural Electrification Act, the ability to connect to every home in the country. We were able to bring electric power to every home. We can do that with broadband access. We can do that at the state level as a public utility, not at a small municipal level, but at the state level, to say everybody is going to get broadband to their home. But that's only one part of it. The other part of it is, just because you have access to something into the home doesn't mean you actually have access. We have to provide subsidies, and this is where we can make funding available through the legalization of cannabis and putting funds back into our disaffected communities, to provide subsidies for individuals to purchase the equipment they need to actually utilize the broadband that they can access through a public utility. They need to be able to have the devices in their home so that their children can access it, so that we can move everybody beyond the digital divide that is growing up in this country.
So this is just a quick follow-up, and it's really just a yes or no. Are you for the legalization of marijuana?
I'm a yes for adult use cannabis.
Okay, okay. Sujata, on that particular regard, what tends to be the issue when it comes to the legalization of marijuana is that it tends to be rich folks, particularly rich white folks, rich white males, that tend to be the beneficiaries of this legalization, because they are, through lobbyists, are being able to fund certain acts or laws that essentially serve as gatekeeping. How will you exactly ensure that what policies, or that you would ensure to make sure that it is an equal playing field for all participants?
Yeah, that's absolutely happened with the hemp licenses and all of the deregulation. So we have to, I think cooperative development is the way to go. We should, as a state, have region by region, especially in disproportionately disadvantaged communities. And we should also really be thinking about Black people, and particularly because Black people have borne the brunt so much of the criminalization of marijuana. and how that has put so many Black people in jail for so long. Really start worker-owned cooperatives for, I'm assuming you're talking about the growing of marijuana for sale, and give the permits to these worker-owned cooperatives, because that lessens the risk and the stress on one person, and it allows the state to give resources for processing equipment and you know, support for sales and marketing, which is a totally different skill than growing. So in general, I think we need more cooperative development across the state, because I think it's a wave of the future in terms of helping us empower ourselves more to own our jobs. But I also think specifically with this, with deregulation of marijuana, we can just give all of the permits to worker-owned cooperatives made up primarily of people who have been disproportionately impacted by these laws over the years.
So just a quick follow-up on that. How would you make it affordable? Because it's one thing to decide to make the permits, but it's another thing to control the cost. How would you control that?
So that's why the cooperative model is so important, because the state can then fund the processing equipment, which can be used collectively. So, you know, everybody can have the amount that they're growing that's part of the cooperative, but then the state can also provide services to help with the distribution and sales and marketing. You know, there'll be regulatory things, so lawyers will need to be provided. And if we have a cooperative development resource centers, we can provide all of that so that people with very, you know, without millions of dollars to spend to develop this product and start selling it, can start getting the support to start that business cooperatively, and then be able to start getting the profits and get that cooperative, you know, self-supporting after that.
Okay, so I got a few minutes here, so I'm trying to get a few more questions in. The next question is to you, Anna. When it comes to the Human Rights Commission, as you mentioned earlier, they essentially have been silenced because of past decisions from past legislators over the last number of years. How exactly will you bring back power to particularly our local human rights office, who essentially has been muted, like I mentioned earlier, for the last number of years?
Yeah, I will answer that. I did, as a former teacher, I did want to do 10 seconds though on the education piece.
Okay.
I just say that we changed the required state curriculum to an anti-racist curriculum. I just need that to be out there. We talk about the Holocaust, but we don't talk about the Middle Passage. We don't talk about the fact that slavery is the, you know, the bonding. Our capitalist system, the infrastructure was based off of bonding done on slavery. So like, anyway, I just want to acknowledge that you can change the state curriculum requirements. So moving on to the commission, Human Rights Commission. Yes. We have, and thank you for bringing that up. So there is now a full panel of the Human Rights Commission. And one of the things that we have been doing, and I think that is really important, is that the initiatives come from them. It is a very diverse group of people, and that they are doing outreach in the community specifically, that it is out, you know, we have created bylaws, but that is the extent to where the legislature action is. And the commission now needs to engage fully with the community. Where are the concerns in the community? Outreach, listening circles, focus groups, bringing that. So the thing that I think that is most important is this commission is an advisory board to the legislature. And there is a lot of education that's needed on the legislature. And so one of the things that we have talked about a lot is, what is it that's in the community that we need to understand, that we need to know, that we need to change? Where is our bias? Where is our structural racism in the infrastructure of our foundation, our institution? So having those conversations and having that through the Human Rights Commission, so that it
10 seconds here.
And influence the infrastructure, the policies, and the programs of the government itself. I think that is a real powerful place. And I think that it's also really needed. So, you know, that is something that I would promote and would really like to see.
So my question, this is to Jordan and Lisa, is when it comes to the police, is it an issue of they have too many responsibilities, or is it a culture issue? And my second question after that is, what policies would you implement to ensure that cities and local counties are participating in community policing and officers are practicing peacekeeping?
Sure, I'll start off. You know, sure, police have a lot of responsibilities, perhaps more than they're truly trained for. But what we need to get away from is the idea that to every crisis, someone who, as we know, is using lethal force, usually against Black people, Black males, Black women, even children, is who shows up at your door to keep the peace. You know, there's a serious imbalance of power that we know affects minorities the most. We just fundamentally need to tailor our response to a crisis at home or something that, you know, may need some law enforcement response to not involve people who have been getting away with using lethal force time and time again without any repercussions.
I apologize for interrupting, Jordan. I'm limited on time, so I just want to clarify: is it a responsibilities issue or a culture issue? When it comes to this idea of policing, some say that they have too many responsibilities. Others say that it's a cultural issue. Which one to you is it?
I mean, I think it's a cultural issue, a fundamental, unfortunate devaluing of the sanctity of life for people who happen to have certain skin color. We've seen it happen time and time again. So, you know, these inherent biases are something that, particularly with police force, but across our society, we need to be, you know, having trainings, making sure that, you know, we move away from this system. So yes, I believe that is cultural.
So for the sake of time, at least I'm going to have you answer the second part of the two questions. What policies would you implement to ensure that cities and local counties, specifically the 125th district, are participating in community policing and officers are practicing peacekeeping, including our sheriffs?
It's definitely cultural. You know, police officers put on the uniform, they can take it off again. A Black person can't take off the color of his or her skin. It's so easy to identify that individual, and it makes that individual a target when the culture of the police force is one of making sure we oppress rather than support. So again, in Cortland County, we've created this CIT crisis intervention team with full bias training, with training on emotionally disturbed response, with community policing, and it really has been leadership at the top, which has created a culture in Cortland, at least, of the fact that we are in this together, we're members of the community together, and that our officers, after there might be an arrest, actually go to the home of the individual after that person is released and check on that individual. And I've seen this happen numerous times. It's a very moving observation on the part of the individual who's been arrested, that he sees that this is not just because I was doing bad things, but that this police officer wants to support this. But it has to, again, money is everything.
Okay.
We had to pay for this ourselves.
Sorry, I had to, you know, for the sake of time. My next question is to Seth. Seth, I keep doing this. I got to get this right.
All right, you're not the only one.
From what you've, you know, particularly what you talked about in your campaign and on your site, you talk a lot about high property tax concerns. And essentially, if we remove the property taxes, that would put us in a way that we can afford lower rent. How can you exactly guarantee that landlords, without having to pay, just because they don't have to pay any, you know, property tax, how can you actually guarantee that, you know, rent would actually be lower? And my second part to that question is, do you know the equation that's used to determine what is considered to be affordable housing?
So I'll just answer the first question first. Yeah, I think we have to shift the state to more progressive income taxes and away from regressive property taxes. And to answer the question about the rent, I mean, that would relieve a lot of landlords from a significant burden if we did that, because what that means is that the income taxes would be paid by the wealthiest members of the state. And it would relieve the burden on local property taxpayers. Now, the question about rent, you know, I think that there have been some steps to institute rent control. I mean, I know that law was passed recently that would actually allow local municipalities to set their own rent control laws. I mean, that's something we've discussed at the local level. It wouldn't apply to all properties. It's only of a certain size and a certain date. But that's something I think it's worth discussing. You know, and even changing the law, it hasn't been updated since 1974. The other thing you asked quickly, what was the second part of your question?
Actually, I'm sorry. I do have to cut back the time.
Okay. Sorry.
We're going to skip this part. So drops out. You're my second to last question. How would you, in terms of economic empowerment, particularly for Black folks in the 125th district, you mentioned banks in terms of banks have a hard time in terms of being consistent with being with loan. and interest rates, so do realtors, right? How do you put Black folks in position to not just be able to be looked at when it comes to finding a house, but also be economically empowered to start their own business? Sujata, can you hear me?
Oh, I'm sorry. That question was for me.
Yeah.
Again, you know, cooperatives, I think, have something, but you're asking about how to get business lending, basically, be more equitable?
Well, between having, having interest rates from banks and having realtors actually consider Black clients, to being able to actually empower Black folks even as young as, toddler age, all the way till they're grown to be economically empowered.
We've got to invest more in small business development, especially in hard hit communities, and especially for Black people and people of color and Indigenous people. We really have to put our money there and make, not just interest rates. We can, as I say, we can have all kinds of incentive programs with a lower interest rate that we can do. I'd like to see a public banking, and this is a bigger question, but if we started putting all of our state taxes all in our own state-owned bank, we could start doing our own lending, and then we get to come up with our own underwriting requirements, which are really controlled a lot of the time at the federal level. So we could get rid of a lot of the ones that disproportionately impact Black people and people of color and people who are more marginalized. And also then we get the interest off of we can do whatever lending rate we want. We can do zero interest loans. We can make them more available, and we get to the interest when every time right now we do a project, we're paying tons of monies to the big banks for our interest. So we can have all of that as more income to use for this lending program instead of it's a huge part of our budget is the interest we pay to big banks.
So this is my last question, and it's posed to everyone here. Southside Community Center is obviously hosting this process, but in the last few months, Southside has been fortunate enough to have members or community folks in general that have been generous enough to support us financially. However, the city in particularly, obviously with the situation going on, has been limited in terms of being able to fully support spaces like Southside that do support the Black community, and then in other communities as well, but predominantly the Black community. Now, with that being said, how will you ensure, for me, that a space like Southside that is built to support the Black community in times whether in times like this that are hard or in times that are more pleasant, will stick around?
Who are you?
And this is to everybody. If you could just limit your answer to 10 seconds, that'd be great.
We gotta stop cutting fundings. Council just met and cut a whole bunch of funding for Southside. Why aren't they cutting funding for the police? We need to put our money where our mouth is. We need to support Black people. We need to support Black community building. And I think that's the number one thing we need to do.
All right, Bo?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, budgets are moral documents. They show what we stand for. I fought in Cortland County to include funding for nonprofits. Community enrichment is a key part of our budget, and it can't just be eliminated. And we've done that here in Cortland, unfortunately, and I fought against it every time, and I'll fight for community enrichment programs in our budget in Albany.
Jordan?
Yeah, I'd actually like to work with Speaker Carl Hastie and the Black, Hispanic, and Puerto Rican Caucus to work on funding these centers across the state, which would also include Southside here in Ithaca. And I would also look to any discretionary money. Sometimes legislators can say, this is a project I care about. I want to dedicate money to it. And I would make Southside a priority, when that happens.
Seth?
I think the city of Ithaca, I know we're going through a very difficult time right now, but I think the city of Ithaca should continue to support Southside. They own the building.
Voted to defund it, sorry.
They provide funding to the staff. I think that should continue. And I think there should be a conversation too, maybe even about Southside eventually purchasing the building. I know that's been a real mission for the community center, and I think that's a conversation we should have. I know that there's been some debates about this before Southside, but I do think there is value in looking at historic preservation of the building. designating the building, just because it would mean that it could never be demolished. And I think that's big. That building has a lot of history. You know, Eleanor Roosevelt came and opened the.
Got about 3 seconds here.
I'd say those three things.
All right. Sujata, I don't know if you went already. I think you might have started the comment at that point.
I did. I'd just like to ask, though, you just voted like a few days ago, Seth, to defund Southside as the number, there was the $23,000 defunded, and it was primarily Southside. You just voted for that in the midst of this.
Seth, would you like to respond to that really quick, and then I'll move on to you, Lisa?
Yeah, I mean, the city of Ithaca, we furloughed 87 employees. I mean, we are facing an unprecedented crisis across the board. I mean, I spent most of today dealing with a bunch of constituents who are trying to figure out how to clean up trash in a park because our park service got furloughed, and the sanitation crews are now having to pick up the trash. I mean, this is a crisis that is facing our city. And I agree. I think we're going to have continued conversation about the funding priorities for the city. And the most important thing we can do is come up with a robust testing and contact tracing program so we can reopen our economy, so we can get our cities back, so we can get GIAC at the Youth Bureau at Southside funded again. That's.
I got about 2 seconds here. All right, Lisa?
So I agree with Bo that budgets are moral documents. This fake 2% tax cap that the governor has instituted across the board has caused municipalities and counties to have to cut back so we can continue to give wealth to already wealthy individuals. If we can change that dynamic and take some of that money away from those rich people, send them back to the municipalities, it will be a huge opportunity for the Ithaca community to show its values by continuing to support the center. In addition, I think it's
You got about 2 seconds here.
It's really important to remember that we have the power. We can do what we want to do in Albany. We have to be bold and tell the governor what we believe in as Assembly people and hold it to the fire.
All right, Anna?
Yeah, honestly, I think it's really simple. This is an issue of priorities. We have a government right now that's over 50% the police on the budget for the city. There are very few places where Black and brown people can be safe and actually have space away from white people. And I think that this shouldn't be on the table, period, in the story. I think that there are other things that could be on the table, and I think that this should be made a priority. So, that is one thing that I would say. The other thing, as far as if I were at the state level, is, that funding community centers like Southside Community Center isn't just a cultural, it's also honestly economic development. There's, the Empire State Development funding. Why is this not being considered? Because
Got about 3 seconds here.
Equity in also that arena. So I would look for other sources outside of just the traditional sources.
All right, Jason?
Yeah, I would simply fund them. I mean, and I've made a community centers a priority in Dryden for 12 years. I would continue to do that at the state level. They're valuable for many reasons, one of them being cultural, the other being things like summer camps. And Southside brings the entire community together. I've been there for plenty of events myself. It's not just for, it's where basically your community can educate mine about who you are, and everything that we don't know and should know, we learn from you. And that's why Juneteenth is so important. So I would just allocate the funding.
With that said, I just want a quick thumbs up from any of you who plan on attending Juneteenth happening this Thursday, Saturday, I should say, hosted by Southside. Okay, that's what I like to see. That's what I like to see. Okay, all right. I'm gonna pass it back on to Nia. Thank you very much for your time.
Yes. Thank you all so much. I'm going to be super fast because I know that you all need to take a break. You might even need to just go to the bathroom or something before your next adventure. But we're so grateful for this time. I want to thank those of you out there who are viewing, folks from Ithaca, folks across the state, or even outside of New York. Thank you to each of the candidates. I feel like I've gotten to know you today, and hopefully the audience feels the same. If there's some pieces, as was mentioned earlier, that you feel like you want to do and say more, you have your platform to flush out the details. Again, as Richard mentioned, please check us out this weekend, virtual Juneteenth on Saturday throughout the day, and keep your ears and eyes open for the next Black Town Hall meeting as well. Indeed. This was awesome. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
I know.
Thank you.
Thank you to all the viewers as well. Please check out Southside Community Center, www.sspride.org.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, Nia.
Thank you. Appreciate the invitation and the opportunity.
Well.
Thank you.
Bye.